Jesus says it's a new commandment, but of course it's not new in the sense that people are like, oh, I'd never thought of that. It shows up in the Torah at least twice. So it's not new in that sense. It's new in the sense of a new understanding of what that would mean, right? That's really what he's driving at here, is the sense of, oh, I see. And then you really can't know what he means as he says that in this moment of time in John's Gospel. It really doesn't make any sense until he completes the Passion, and there becomes the context for understanding what he means about love. And so as you look at his life, as you look at the way he dies, then you have to say, oh my goodness, that's what he means by how we love one another. And what that's rooted in ultimately isn't, interestingly enough, sacrifice. It's really rooted in grace. It's really rooted in his fullness of giving. And so for you and I, the question then becomes that, or that we need to see the challenge or the commandment, not so much about saying that we're going to give up our lives for others, but that we're going to give away our lives for others. Just two different prepositions, but very different meanings here. Think about it. If to give something up, there's nothing personal about it. You just gave it up. He gave up his seat on the bus. She gave up her job. But to give away something has something far more relational with it right at the start, doesn't it? I gave it away to someone. Giving up, you could just throw something in the air and you gave it up. Think about it at Lent. People say, well, I'm giving this up for Lent. There's nothing necessarily personal about giving something. I gave up sweets for Lent. Yay, big deal. How does that necessarily do anything for anyone else? It doesn't. It's really just a self-discipline act, and quite frankly can often lead us to pride. I used to spend a lot of time with the Trappists out at the Snowmass Monastery, and the Trappists used to, for the longest time, begin Lent with a true full fast, that they only drank water. And of course, one by one, they would collapse, because you can't do that for 40 days, right? But then it became a point of pride that they might talk a little bit about who collapsed first. You know, like, oh, he's really not a very good Trappist, you know. And then look at me, I made it 22 days. You've done permanent kidney damage, brother. Yes, but I outlasted them all. You see, it's crazy. And that's not what drove Jesus to do what he does. He does what he does out of love, out of the fullness of his identity, not out of some self-denial. That's a really important thing to understand about what drives him. Otherwise, what you've got is the bloodlust version of our theology. And quite frankly then, as Dr. Peter Kreeft points out, we would only need a little bit of his blood, right? Quite frankly, his circumcision would have been our salvation, or the first skinned knee that he had as a little boy. But the thing about God is, God doesn't do it that way. God is always the fullness. He pours out all his blood. Why? Because that's what God does. That's the Trinity, right? They're pouring themselves out fully into one another. That's what a Trinitarian belief is. And so what's the community being asked to do? The same thing. To strive to find the way that we live love limitless. Can we find it limitlessly? Can we? That's the distinction. Because self-denial, as I said, in and of itself, that often just leads to pride. I gave this up. But to give it away, oh, that's something entirely different. That's the challenge. As I said, I'm not saying it wasn't a sacrifice. It absolutely was a sacrifice. He died for us. He poured it out for us. It's what we celebrate on this altar, which, while very pretty, altars, right, is where things got killed, where things got sacrificed. So I am certainly not denying the sacrifice. But the fullness of Jesus' identity, that's what gets lived. He couldn't have done it any other way. It's why it isn't till the very end that he says, we say in Latin, consummatum est. It is, we've translated that, it is finished. It's really a terrible translation of that. We get our word consummate from what he said. It is complete. It is the fullness of engagement is what he's saying. And then the soldier thrust the lance into his side, and blood and water flowed. That's why that's an important detail in that story. It's not just barbarism that the soldier does that. It's to say he dumped it all out. He gave it all away. And when he did that, we won. When he did that, it led to conquering sin and death. And so that's what makes this commandment new, is that we would see it that way. That we're not being called to self-denial. We're being called to live the fullness of our identity. We're not being called to sacrifice without any context. We're being called to do it in grace just as he did. Yes, sacrifice. Share with each other. Take the time to listen to one another. Take the time to go visit the sick. Take the time to give of your resources to those who are in need. All the things that Jesus talks about. But we don't do all those things for the sake of self-denial, for the sake of sacrifice. We do them for love. We give them away. Our time, our talent, our treasure. We give them away because that's very personal. That's very intimate. We know when people have done that for us. We know when someone's busy and they take the time to sit with us, to listen to us. Not try to fix us, but just to be present to us. That is a reflection of God's love. They're pouring it out for us. I don't know about you, but for me, when people do that for me, it calls me to go, I got to do that for others too. And that's what's going to pour off this altar into our bodies, is that kind of love, is that kind of sacrifice. He's giving it away to us so that we would in turn give it away to others. May God be praised.